I have been a long time lurker here, so today is my 39th birthday. I just went to lunch with Grandma and two of my teen sons to a restaurant that I haven't been to in over 3 years. The last time I was here with my granddad, the man that taught me everything I know. As Grandma, my sons, and I sat there waiting to order and eat, I kept zoning out. I was just looking around the restaurant, and everywhere I look, I kept seeing flashes of my grandfather. It was weird because I would see him at different ages growing up because we had most of our private meetings at the restaurant. We have been going to this restaurant since I was 5 years old. As our dinner went on, Grandma asked me why I was so quiet. I answered that I just don't have anything to say. Well, she continued on whatever she and my two teenage sons were talking about. When we left, I rode with them and she asked me if I was okay, and I just said I was fine. I realized I have to write my story down somewhere, and maybe someone that is going through what I went through would learn from it. I appreciate my granddad more now than when he was alive for how he saved me from myself. I recently saw this quote from somewhere. It goes like, "What's hidden can be found, and what's protected is still protected." I didn't appreciate this quote till my ex wife cheated on me and plotted with her affair partner to take over half of my real estate portfolio in the divorce settlement. When the expensive lawyers she hired realized that my assets were protected, they dumped her case faster than they took it. Her affair partner was her ex boyfriend, and she has been allowing him to live as a tenant in my rental property without my knowledge for over 3 years before D Day. I own multiple rental properties, most of which I inherited from my grandfather, and my ex wife helped in managing the properties till we got divorced. I have a massive portfolio of apartment units that I inherited from my grandfather. The properties generate net cash flow of 6 figures weekly. D Day was a year ago. I was 38 years old, and my wife was 36 at the time, and I have been married to my ex wife for 13 years. We have known each other for 21 years, and we went to high school together. We didn't start dating till my early 20s. During high school, I was known as the rich kid because of my grandfather's wealth. He was a self made millionaire, came from nothing. My parents passed away in a car accident when I was 4 years old, so I was taken in by my grandparents. Granddad was a real estate investor and started accumulating real estate properties since the 70s. 2 years after my granddad passed away, my ex wife filed for divorce after an employee she fired became a whistleblower and ratted her out. She filed for divorce thinking that she and her affair partner would get half of my inheritance and the properties I acquired during our marriage. What I didn't tell her was my grandfather didn't trust me enough to transfer over his properties till I was 50 years old. So the LLC that I bought properties under was held by an offshore trust created by my grandfather. I can't blame him for not trusting me because I was a bad kid growing up, dealing with abandonment issues. I was a junkie, and he did not trust my judgment. He decided to hand over all his properties to an offshore trust. Granddad modified his will when I was about 24 years old, out of prison and going to rehab. That was when I got married to my ex wife, and he wasn't a big fan of her. I wasn't aware that he modified his will till I spoke to his estate lawyer during my divorce. In my mid 20s, after I went to prison, I changed to a different person. I grew up and realized that I was wasting my life, and this was my final chance. I got rid of my criminal ways and my junkie habit, but I forgot to get rid of something else that my granddad didn't like, my ex wife, and I carried her over to my new life. I became close with my granddad after I got rid of my addiction and getting into trouble, but he never changed his will. We acquired a lot of properties together and worked closely, and every property I bought while I was married to my ex wife was under the offshore trust behalf as an employee. I never thought about going on my own because I saw it as a family business. I knew I was going to inherit my grandfather's leftovers because I was all they had. I saw their wealth as my wealth. When we made the biggest deal in our portfolio, a 423 apartment unit in California. I was married to my wife. All transactions was done on an LLC, and the LLC is owned by the offshore trust. The offshore trust pays a salary to me and eventually to my ex-wife when she started working as a property manager. My ex-wife thought that I owned the trust, and she didn't know that it was an offshore trust. I knew, but I never thought about it like that, and I didn't understand much of it as well. The legal side of the business bored me, so I allow my granddad trusted estate lawyer to handle it. I know I am all over the place with my story, and I feel like I'm getting too far ahead of myself, so let me give you some background so you have a better understanding. I met my wife when I was in high school, but we didn't date at the time because I wouldn't give her a time of the day. I was that rich kid with multiple girlfriends. I drove the nicest cars, hosted the best parties, got the best drugs, and everyone wanted to be my friend. My grandmother spoiled me because my dad and mom died when I was 4 in a car accident, and my dad was their only son. I was the only child of my parents. Grandma would always spoil me with expensive gifts and whatever I asked for, and Granddad would try to stop her several times, saying that she was turning me into a spoiled brat. And sure enough, he was right. By the time I turned 18, I had already racked up a rap sheet of 1 DUI, 2 DWI, arrested for driving without license, drug possession, disturbing the peace, and etc. My grandma would bail me out and blame the policeman each time. LOL. To my grandpa's dismay. He basically wrote me off. He couldn't write me off his will though, so he tried to protect me from myself by adding a maturity date to the beneficiary in his will. He already had the offshore trust when he first made his wealth in the 90s because of a bad experience in the early 80s when he got sued by one of his tenants with small children. That bankrupted him and he had to start over. When he got back to his feet, he understood the importance of protecting his assets because he learned the hard way when he faced bankruptcy. He created an LLC and added further layers of protection by adding ownership of the LLC in a trust located outside the jurisdiction of the U.S. court system, so they are not subject to U.S. laws. After my wife cheated on me and divorced me, there were lawyers lining up to take her case. During the discovery, my wife's divorce lawyer found out that she's worth more married to me than divorcing me because I was being paid salary by the offshore trust. Even the house we live in together was owned by the trust. The major deals that Granddad and I closed before we stopped adding to our portfolio were done while I was married to my ex-wife. But I was more of an apprentice than a business partner, and I was paid a salary regardless of how hard I work. Granddad lived a modest life, and the more time I spent with him, the more I became frugal like him. The decision that I should be paid salary was made by my granddad to control my spending habits. I accepted it because I wanted to change to a different person and didn't want to revert to my old ways. Before I graduated high school, my grandparents wanted me to go to college and become a lawyer. But I had different plans for myself though. I was going in and out of juvenile detentions. I was partying all the time and didn't care what happened to me because I had my grandma to bail me out. So I just didn't care. Then I went to prison for possession in my early 20s. After I got arrested this final time, my granddad had enough and he refused to allow my grandma to get me out of trouble. I thought he wanted me to rot in prison, but grandma would visit me behind his back. I had my Damascus moment in prison. I learned to appreciate the small things in life. The majority of convicts in prison didn't have the opportunities that I had, and they are surprised that I threw all that away to join them in prison. I was dealing with abandonment issues. I tried to blame it on my parents for leaving me in this world, and tried to blame my problems on others, but ultimately it was my fault. I did my time, and it profoundly changed me. I finally realized that going to prison was the best thing that could have happened to me. I was able to get over my addiction and was determined to focus and become the man my granddad always wanted me to be. I would listen to stories of other convicts who grew up in less privileged households with no support from their relatives I had the support of my grandparents and had enough money, and I threw it all away. Their experience lit a fire in me. I was determined to use the rest of the time I had on earth for good and to make my grandparents proud when I get out of prison. When I got out of prison, I was 24, and going to university wasn't an option for me. My granddad wanted me to join the family business. He was still unsure about me, and I was determined to earn his trust. So I went and got my real estate license. I took the exam and passed on the second try. I dedicated my time in real estate to learn as much as my granddad could teach me before he passed on. When I got out of prison, I met my ex-wife. We already knew each other from high school, so we started dating. I knew some of the guys she dated in the past. She had addiction problems in the past as well, and we bonded over that. My granddad didn't like my ex-wife and warned me about her, but back then, I didn't listen. We got married when I was 24 years old. My granddad wanted me to get a prenup, but I didn't listen and didn't see the use for it because I was in love. I thought we were going to live happily ever after. It was during that period that my granddad added a clause to his will, so I would be an employee to the trust, and I could only gain full ownership when I turned 50. I replaced my addiction and propensity for getting into trouble to becoming a workaholic. After my ex-wife gave birth to our son, my grandparents were forced to accept her in the family, especially my grandma. The reason my granddad wasn't a fan of my ex-wife was because she was connected to my past, and he could tell that she was very materialistic. I would later find out that he had someone look into her and found out that she was trouble. But back then, I thought my granddad was just controlling and wanted to control who I interact with because he didn't trust me. Granddad was right. After my ex-wife gave birth, she changed to a different person, nagging constantly and spending frivolously. We were at each other's throats every time I came home. After I kicked my addiction habit, we had nothing in common. Our relationship was really toxic. It got to a point where I refused to go home after a busy day at work because I couldn't get a moment of peace in my house. That contributed to what pushed me to become a workaholic. The more I became a workaholic, the more I could relate to my granddad. We became close, and I became his assistant, his confidant in all his business dealings. He would buy residential and office spaces, rehab them, and flip them for profit, and keep the rest in his portfolio. All the profits were transferred to the offshore trust account. Regardless of how hard I work, I received the same salary of about $15,000 a month. I could ask for more, but my ex-wife would just spend it because we shared the same account, and I only needed money for food, gas, and a white t-shirt and jeans, so I probably spent $1,000 a month. I completely lost track of how much my ex-wife spent, and she had free reign of my income. I had everything I wanted at the time. I had 2 beautiful sons, my grandparents were happy with me, and I was doing well and becoming a seasoned real estate investor, and I had gained the trust of my granddad. The only thing I was missing was a happy wife. After our second son was born, my relationship with my ex-wife deteriorated. It got to a point where I wouldn't come home for 2 days to avoid her nagging and fighting. She had always been a stay-at-home mom, up until 3 years ago when she decided that she wanted to work in my family business. It came as a surprise to me because I knew she doesn't like to work, something my granddad told me about her before, but I refused to believe him because I had this idea that my granddad was controlling. When I told my granddad that my ex-wife was trying to work in our family business, he was skeptical. Back then, I was already taking full control of the business operation because my granddad was falling ill. So I hired her in a role on the management side of the properties. About a year after, my granddad and I stopped acquiring properties and laid off the contractors on the rehab side of the business. So I focused on managing the portfolio that we already own. It didn't take long for my ex-wife to start playing a much larger role in the management side of the business, but our relationship was still strained. The good thing of her working is having her out of the house so I could come home and have peace. Our bedroom life was non-existent, and we weren't getting along well. I knew eventually that we were going to get a divorce, and I thought I had to liquidate or give her a fraction of my portfolio if we divorced, which was why I stayed with her longer than I wanted to. I was incredibly ignorant about the legal side of my business. I understood that we grew apart and we shared 2 sons together. And when we divorced, She gets a fraction of what I made during our marriage, and I pay child support. But I will soon find out that it was more complicated than that due to the offshore trust. I wasn't a greedy person, and I was willing to share with her so she could maintain the same lifestyle when we divorced. But that all changed when I found out that she was cheating on me and how long the affair had been going on. She had also been paying him out of our shared bank account with my hard-earned money. I only found out about the affair when she fired an employee that worked with her, and the fired employee confided in me that there was a tenant that my ex-wife was allowing to stay at the property, and he wasn't paying rent. She claimed that when the tenant comes around, my ex-wife would let him in her office, and they would close the door and spend hours locked inside. She told me the name of the tenant, and I looked him up. I had all his biographical information, and I did a background check on him. I recognized him from my high school days, when I was running around with girls and partying. He was my ex-wife's ex-boyfriend before we started dating. A total loser. She gave me records to prove that he stayed at my apartment for over 3 years without paying rent. I confronted my ex-wife about him. She confessed that she allowed him to stay for over 3 years because I had the record to prove it. I asked her how long the affair had been going on, and she lied that they weren't having an affair. Her affair made me realize how generous I have been towards her, and how she was taking advantage of my generosity. I have hundreds of apartments, so the rent loss doesn't affect me. It wasn't about the money, but the lies, the cheating, the disrespect, using my money to enjoy and go on vacation with her loser ex. This was unacceptable, especially since her affair was the reason why she was turning against me and making my home a nightmare for me. Furthermore, I requested an audit on all my units that she manages, and I found out that she had been allowing some of her friends and relatives to stay at my property without paying rent. I fired her immediately, knowing that she would try to file for a divorce, and sure enough, she did. Up until the divorce, I rarely spoke to the estate attorney. Although he had requested to meet me several times, he was never my priority till now. I just thought he wanted to justify why we pay him every month. I am sure that he had explained to me several times before about the offshore trust, but I didn't pay attention till I found out about my ex-wife cheating and when she filed for divorce. After my ex-wife served me the divorce paper, I confronted her and we got into an argument where she blamed me for losing interest in our marriage, and that was why she went back to her ex-boyfriend. I know how to push her button, and I said whatever I could to anger her, which caused her to confess to me her real plans. She started seeing her ex-boyfriend about 5 years ago, on and off, and they became consistent 3 years ago. That was when she suddenly got interested in working in my family's business, so she could understand the business and get a piece of it during our divorce. If she had done her research, she would have known that I earned a W-2 wage, and the income in our joint account is consistent with a W-2 earnings, and my real estate portfolio ownership is under an offshore trust. On paper, I was just an employee that wakes up in the morning and go to work every day. Even our home belongs to the trust. Long story short, the lawyer she hired for discovery later quit as soon as they realized my property was untouchable, and the only money she got from the divorce settlement was half of the $82,000 that should have already been at her disposal in our joint bank account had she stayed married to me. I made sure we shared the money in my bank account even though I didn't need it, out of spite, and she only got less than $35,000 after the divorce. According to my last W-2, I was making a little over 6 figures. No retirement contribution. I had to pay child support based on my W-2 income, which were peanuts compared to my real earnings. Although I had 5 expensive cars that I had to liquidate because they were in my name. They were given to me as gifts from the trust, so I gave her 2 of the cars. Before the divorce, she had been working for 3 years as a property manager and was earning good money. She wasn't even eligible for alimony from me. Her plan backfired. She cheated and filed for divorce, thinking that she would get millions. Now she's older, approaching 40, working at a grocery store and living off my child support payment. Thank you for watching to the end of the video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please hit the thumbs up. It won't cost you anything and it will help my channel. Thank you and have